If you went to art school, if you've taken a painting class, or you've read painting books, or even if you've watched some videos on YouTube about painters, you've probably heard a lot of different rules when it comes to painting. You may have even internalized these rules without even fully realizing it. But what if these rules are actually not that helpful? So in this video, I'm going to talk about a few rules that I've heard when it comes to painting that in many cases have actually held back my art practice. Oftentimes people hear these rules and they ask me that if they don't follow them, if they're cheating. And I want to dispel this myth because in art, there is no cheating. You can do whatever you want, and that's what makes art so amazing. Now, I want to say that these rules are useful. They can be really helpful, but I think it's important that we as artists know when to apply them and when they are useful and when it's best to let them go. And just as a quick note, if you like my videos and you want to see more, be sure to check out my Patreon. I share my videos early and ad-free and also have exclusive behind-the-scenes content and full-length, real-time painting videos. So I hope you'll join me. Now let's talk about the rules. The first rule that I've heard from many people is that you need to draw everything freehand. You can't trace, you can't use a grid, you can't use a projector, or anything other than just looking at an object and drawing it based on what you see. People will even say that using something like a projector or tracing or using a grid is cheating. And I want to say that that's just not true. Now, I do think it's really important to learn how to draw, to be able to look at something, to look at a still life, a figure, a landscape, and be able to draw it yourself without any aids. Especially if you are in a figure drawing class or you're plein air painting, you're not going to be able to necessarily take a photo or get a projector, project the image, make a grid, take all that time and use that equipment to trace things out. It's much better if you can just freehand it and eyeball something and draw directly from what you're seeing. Plus, if you're good at drawing and you're able to draw without these aids, then you can make stronger, more confident marks. And I think that that has a big impact on your painting. But that being said, it's not uncommon to see our favorite artists using tools to help them get accurate drawings. So when it comes to the rule that you need to draw everything freehand, what I say is if you want to practice your drawing skills, then yes, drawing freehand is the best way to do that. But if you want to get straight to the painting, or if you're working against a deadline, or if you just want to get something really accurate and you're not so concerned about practicing the drawing process, then I think it's totally fine to use a grid, use a projector, use something that's going to help you get those accurate shapes in so that you can get to painting. Unless you're trying to be the best draftsperson, the best at drawing in the whole world, then you don't need to follow this rule all the time. Remember, when it comes down to it, it's more about what you're making and how you feel making it, not the exact process that you're following. When I go to a museum and I see a Vermeer painting and I'm just struck by the beauty of the light and color in the painting, I'm not asking myself whether or not he traced. The second rule that I've often heard is that you have to paint everything from life, and that working from photos is bad. I do think it's great to paint from life. If you're painting from life, you're observing colors as you actually see them with your own eyes versus how the camera sees them. And I feel like as humans, each of us sees the world in such a unique and important way, and the camera kind of homogenizes that. It has this consistency and similarity. Also, the camera kind of distorts reality in different ways. So for example, when I'm looking at something, the shadows might be more luminous, and then when I take a photo with it, they end up looking sort of dark, or the contrast of the image might be different from what I'm seeing with my own eyes. So the camera definitely changes, or there's definitely differences between the way the camera sees the world and the way our eyes see the world. And you're not really going to notice that if you're always painting from photographs. So I think that's why it is important to paint directly from life. But I don't do it all the time. In fact, most of the time I'm painting from photos. Working from photos is great if you want to capture a particular lighting at a certain time of day, if you're capturing something very transient, or you're trying to paint a living subject like a person or an animal. In that case, I think working with photos is a great and practical option. So I still think it's important to paint from life and to do that often, but you can also work from photos too. Just be aware of the limitations of your camera, know how it's different from your own visual experience, and then use those insights wisely in your painting. The third rule I've often heard is that you can't use black paint. The idea is that black just leads to dull colors and unexciting paintings. But this isn't true, and many artists throughout history have used black on their palette. Personally, I don't usually use black on my palette because I like to mix it from a blue, a red, and a yellow. But I know many painters who have black on their palette and use it all the time. So I would recommend, rather than saying you can't paint with black at all, instead get comfortable using a limited palette of the primary colors. So a red, a yellow, a blue, and a white. Get really used to working with just those colors and mixing all of the colors you need from that small set. And then you can add black back to your palette, but do it in a more conscious way. Do it understanding how it's going to impact all of the colors. And don't just use black as a crutch. I think that's one of the reasons why people say not to use it, because it's so simple. If you have a color and you want to make it darker, as a beginner, you might just want to add black. But I think this is where the problem is, because then it can lead all of our colors to having that dullness that people warn about. But if you're used to working with a limited palette first and you're mixing all of your colors and you know how all the colors work together, then you can safely start to add black, and I think that it can add a lot of potential to your palette. The main thing is don't use black as a crutch, instead use it strategically and thoughtfully. The fourth rule I often hear is that you have to prep all of your materials, including stretching your own canvases. I don't know exactly where I first heard this myth, but I've definitely heard it from a lot of people, and it's a question I often get: do I stretch my own canvases? I think it connects to this romantic idea of the artists in the studio mixing all of their own paints, stretching their own canvases, doing basically everything from scratch. Also, I think in the past, a lot of people didn't have access to high quality stretched canvas, so the only way to make nice canvases was to stretch them themselves. But now, with the internet, with being able to shop online, many of us can purchase high quality canvases for our studios. So if you have the time and you like to stretch your own canvases, then go for it. That's amazing. But if you want to get straight to painting and you don't have much time, then there are a lot of great high quality canvases out there that I think work great for the studio. These high quality pre-stretched canvases are used by professional artists and amateurs alike, and they work great. Another rule that I've often heard is that if you want to be taken seriously, you have to use oil paint. Now, personally, I love oils. I think that they have such an amazing consistency and the colors are so beautiful, and I don't know, there's something about them that just makes my heart sing. But they're not for everyone. I think sometimes paints like acrylics aren't perceived as seriously because when people think about the tradition of painting, they think about oils, since that's what a lot of the old masters use. But I'm sure if the old masters were alive today, many of them would be acrylic painting too. They just didn't have acrylics at the time. Acrylic paint can be just as beautiful, just as luminous, and it's also just as archival as oil paints. Both oil paints and acrylic paints are great for painters, and it just depends on what you like. Acrylic paints are fast, they're flexible, they're vibrant, and they're used by many professional painters today. So don't worry about which paint is more prestigious, but instead use which paint works best for your process. Another rule I've heard is that you have to paint traditionally, and that digital art is not fine art. It kind of goes back to the oil painting example, but it's this idea that serious fine artists are working with real paints on canvas, and if you're not doing that, then your art doesn't count. This is just not true. You can totally make fine art as a digital artist. And as time goes on, there have been more and more ways for digital artists to show their work at art fairs, in galleries, and in other venues. And I believe digital art will only continue to grow. In fact, digital art can push boundaries in ways that traditional art can't. So I'm really excited to see where this goes in the future. Remember, the tools don't define the value of the work. It's the intention, it's the meaning, it's the experience of the artist that does. The next rule is that you have to find a style and stick to it, because that's your brand. You need a signature look to be taken seriously. But if you look at all these artists in the art history books, so many of them have had these incredible transitions throughout their careers. Now, having a signature look and sticking to it is great for commercial brands, but artists are not brands. We're people. We evolve, we change, and that's normal. And if we didn't, or if our art just stayed the same and we were kind of repeating something again and again, then I think that it actually ends up losing life. Like the artwork loses a lot of that meaning and vitality that it had in the first place. And many artists throughout art history have had these vast changes in their style over time. I think a great example is Pablo Picasso, who went through so many different styles and shifts and periods. Sure, he's known for his cubist designs like portraits and still lifes, but he actually went through so many different styles throughout his career. And it wasn't even all in one sort of straight line or progression. He was painting classical paintings while he was also painting these cubist designs too. Many artists' styles will shift based on the motif, their feeling, the medium, their experience that day, and that's completely normal. So instead, trying to shoehorn your art into a particular style, focus on growing, experimenting, following your curiosity. That's going to lead you in the right direction. So those are just some rules that I've followed myself in the past and I found were holding me back. There are probably other rules that you've heard, and I'd encourage you to think about them and really assess whether or not these rules are helpful or hurtful to your artistic practice. You can also experiment by trying out the rule for a little bit and seeing if it works for you. These rules might sound helpful, and they may have even helped some of your favorite artists or teachers, but every artist is different, and ultimately art is about freedom. You get to decide what you want to do. So, is there a rule that you're struggling with and ready to let go of? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, be sure to check out my Patreon, where I share exclusive content, behind-the-scenes painting videos, and full-length art videos too. So I hope you'll join me on Patreon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.